Do that. Cool. All right. Told y'all I'd be back with John Weeks this evening. So I'm wearing different clothes and I've showered. No longer, I don't smell like chicken shit anymore. Like I've done all the good stuff. So what's up, John?
I'm doing well, Tommy. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So I recorded my episode earlier. I didn't get a chance to record Monday or Tuesday on the UFC White House event that was this past Sunday. So typically UFC fights are on Saturdays, and I will I don't miss a UFC event unless women are headlining the event, and I don't watch female fighters. I refuse. They're worthless. It's worse than the WNBA. But
You're a gentleman. You don't want to watch
I
violence
don't
against
like
women.
it's uncomfortable. It's extremely uncomfortable. I don't like to see women get hit, and it bothers me. Yeah. So and that's the honest truth. I just don't like to see women get hit. It bugs me. And so I don't like what I didn't like it when it was Ronda Rousey, and I don't like it anymore now. It's number one, the competition isn't as high, the skill level isn't as high. But number two, I don't like to see women get hit, and I find it uncomfortable to watch, and I don't like it. And
Unseemly, definitely.
yeah, so um, Kim being a former K1 fighter, he's trained women, and we've talked about this. I've had Matt Brown on my show. He agrees with me. Kim disagrees with me. To each their own, but I will not watch it. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. It's not entertaining to me. But I have been watching UFC for since the 90s and since I was like 14 years old. And so I had to watch the event. I don't miss events. I watch UFC all the time. So I felt like since there was kind of like a little political kind of like um, eh, side to it, I would actually cover it and publish it at the Libertarian Institute. So that's what I did earlier today. And so and
I've watched the beginning of it,
yeah, yeah.
and I
So
thought it was so fascinating. You're going into the history of the UFC and the business aspect of it, that I never knew about.
yeah,
I thought that was really cool. People should definitely
I
check
try to
that
be
out.
sure to make sure I tell you like this is 30 years ago, so I'm sure I got some of the facts wrong, some of the details wrong, but generally, I mean, I know I know the history of it just because I've been around it my entire life. I mean, majority of my life, 30 years I've been watching it, so I understand what happened, where it came from, and all that. So yeah, I appreciate you listening to that. Yeah. And
It's a
yeah.
banger.
Yeah, I talk a little bit about the politics, and then I get into the storyline of Justin Gaethje and why it's such a big deal that he won the belt that night. And I think it's a good one. I think people are going to enjoy that episode because I tried to break down the sport a little bit too for people that don't keep track of the sport, don't understand the ins and the outs of the sport. I tried to dumb it down a little bit and make it easy to understand. Like this is what we mean when we say this. This is what we're talking about when we say this. Because, I mean, with anything, whether you're talking libertarianism, orthodoxy, UFC, anything, there's like an insider language to everything that those people understand that an outside force wouldn't understand. And some people think if I just say interim belt, people know what interim belt means. And it's like, no, they don't know what that means. They don't know why it exists. They don't understand what it is. And so I tried to get into a little bit of that, explain the history of where Justin Gaethje came from, who he is, and why it was a big deal. It was a big Cinderella Man moment. If you like the Rocky stories, you like the Cinderella Man story, the underdog story. I mean, like you'll love what Justin Gaethje did if you just watch it from that entertainment sports perspective. But there is a political perspective to be looked at as well. So I don't diminish the fact that people look at it from a political perspective. And I think I give a pretty decent assessment of what most people's arguments are with it and what I think the solution should be. So, but yeah,
Excellent.
so yeah, we recorded that earlier. The political section only lasts about 23, 24 minutes, but that's the at the very beginning. So if you skip to past the 23-minute mark, you'll be getting directly into the fights pretty quickly and hear me talk about the story of Justin Gaethje and the underdog story and what it means, and why it was such a big deal, and why, I mean, this story could have never been told the way it occurred in Hollywood. Like, I mean, he was a 6-1 underdog, you know, nobody thought he had a chance in the world to win. And I kept telling my son, I said, if Justin Gaethje gets past the second round, Ilya Taporia is in trouble. And sure enough, that Spaniard had it coming for him. So, yeah. So, yeah. He broke both of his orbitals and his nose. So,
Damn.
yep. Justin Gaethje is no joke. He will change your life. He's like, I've seen him do it to
He
too many
touched him.
people. I've seen him do it to too many people. Like he will reconstruct your entire face and change your life. He's just he's just a, he's a brutal guy. And so, yeah, if you like the sport, it's definitely, if you haven't watched the fight, definitely worth watching. If you're interested in the politics and you want to hear my take on it, and then I had something to say about it. So, yeah. But we're still doing rules for radicals. We're in the second part of tactics. That's what we're doing tonight. So,
Yes, we are.
yeah. Yeah. And so, a competition. Competition. All right. You want to get rolling?
Let's do it, brother.
All right. Once we understand the external reactions of the haves to the challenges of the have nots, then we go to the next level of examination, the anatomy of power of the haves among themselves. But let us go deeper into the psyche of this Goliath. The haves possess and in turn are possessed by power. Obsessed with the fear of losing power, their every move is dictated by the idea of keeping it. The way of life of the haves is to keep what they have and wherever possible to shore up their defenses. And the have nots are possessed with the idea of taking what the haves have. So maybe we have a bigger issue here than the haves having and the have nots having not. But that is to be discussed. This opens up a new visa. Not only do we have a whole class determined to keep its power and in constant conflict with the have nots, at the same time, they are in conflict among themselves. Power is not static, it cannot be frozen and preserved like food, it must grow or die. Therefore, in order to keep power, the status quo must get more. But from whom? There's just so much more that can be squeezed out of the have nots, so the haves must take it from each other. They are on a road from which there is no turning back. This power cannibalism of the haves permits only temporary truces, and only when equally confronted by a common enemy. Even then, there are regular breaks in the ranks as individual units attempt to exploit the general threat for their own special benefit. Here is the vulnerable belly of the status quo. So, problem he's recognizing a serious problem with like human deficiency and human flaws, that those with power are addicted to power and wish to have more power. And this power can come in many forms. And I talk about this a little bit on that podcast earlier, whether that form is money or fame or whatever it may be. But the solution to this problem is not a revolution in which to give the have nots the power that the haves have. The solution to this problem is to recognize the appropriate, um, the appropriate authority structure that we are endowed with and to give the power to the proper place. and to humble ourselves and understand who we are and what we are supposed to be, not to exalt ourselves and try to take for ourselves in this greed stricken like possession, because the possession is the see possession what you don't get told, like you watch like a show like The Exorcist and you think of possession a certain way, but what possession is, it's like an addiction. Possession is this this desire to obtain beyond naturality. And so the possession of the haves, the possession of power for the haves, is the fact that they never have enough power. And it doesn't matter how much power they accrue, right? The Caesars were seen as gods. The pharaohs of Egypt were seen as gods, but they were never happy with that power as a god on earth. They wanted to continue to accrue more because there was never a such thing as enough people viewing them as a god to make them happy. They were always trying to fulfill that hole within themselves to accomplish something that was beyond, because of their own insecurities. It had nothing to do with power within itself. It had to do with fulfilling a hole within themselves to secure themselves as to what they thought they should be. And so they seek outside themselves for that security and for that emotional stability and that spiritual stability, when all those things come to you internally through a relationship with Christ. And that's what I talked about this a little bit on that podcast earlier.
Last time that we spoke, you said we were talking about the contemporary view on justice, which I was simplifying is basically people see justice as fairness. And you said that's a mistake. And you define justice as appropriate order.
Mm.
And then, so I've had that idea, thinking about that idea for the past couple of weeks. And you had got me into the Lord of Spirits podcast.
Right.
And I started with an episode they did on modernism and postmodernism.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone back and listened to it a couple times because there's just so much to unpack in it.
I'm it's like
no, seriously,
3.5 hours that could be turned into like a freaking actual like college level course that takes up an entire semester.
And I listened to it. When I listened to it again, I'm like, did I even listen to it the first time? Because like, wow, now I'm really like zeroing in on this different thing. But one thing they said in there was that like an ideology is like a spirit that possesses you.
Mm.
And so I have had that idea, thinking about that idea for a while now. And one of the contributing writers at the Libertarian Institute, Brad Pierce, had posted something about ideology and like the contemporary understanding of it going back to the 19th century. And I was like, oh, that's so cool that he's interacting with that. So I asked him, this is on X. I was like, hey, can you recommend any good books or articles about ideology from like the way that you're understanding it? And the book that he recommended, I thought he was going to recommend like, some sort of like college textbook or scholarly paper. The book that he recommended was Demons by Dostoevsky.
Mm.
And he has
Devils.
a new podcast. Devils. Okay.
Yeah.
Devils. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. It's sitting on my table in the kitchen. So yeah, I know.
Oh,
exactly
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I have his whole collection.
And,
so
I've read Crime and Punishment, but that's it. And so Brad has a new podcast with Matt Taibbi called Get Lit, where they talk
Mm.
about literature. And I think they've had 3 episodes so far. The first one they did, I think, The Assembly, um, an ancient Greek play, and now they've done Discourses by Machiavelli in 2 parts. But the next one, I think next week, is they're going to do Devils.
Mm.
So I'm really excited to see their take on it, and then to go and read the book. So when you're talking about like a an addiction, possession is like an addiction,
Mm.
and an addiction to power. That's really resonating with, like, yeah, what actually it does it mean to be possessed by an ideology?
Mm.
Because you could say, oh, like that guy's a liberal or that guy's a conservative. Or you could say, I've had really smart people point this out to me, like, or you could say, like, that person is like partaking in the liberal mind.
Mm.
There's like a way of thinking that we could call liberal, or we could call modern or postmodern. And like a person's partaking in it, they might not be fully partaking in it. They might be partaking in different ways of thinking.
Yeah.
But it is almost like a possession. And I'll notice it when, I think we talked about this last time, that, like, if you ask someone a question, or you give someone a fact who is possessed by the ideologies, like the ideology just goes to work, almost like telling them what to say and certain moves to make, like deny what you're saying, or say, oh yeah, it's true, but that's just because of the bad culture, or that's because of capitalism and money is doing stuff to people.
Mm.
Um, but like here with Alinsky, when he's talking about the the haves, like when he was first talking about the haves, I thought he really meant more in terms of like material and wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this aspect of like state power.
Right.
But I'm really not sure exactly, like, it's like he doesn't like the successful uh productive people that go to the theater,
Yeah. Well, he doesn't want to
you
get
know.
too specific because, right, like think about it. The Clintons were Alinskyites, so were the Obamas, right? They were all Alinskyites. So he doesn't want them to accrue wealth and power and then not utilize it for the furtherance of the ideology. So he can't say that if you are a have, you're necessarily bad. He's just diagnosing the problem between the haves and have nots. And if the have nots wish to get power, this is what they must do. So there's a vagueness to what he's writing and what he's saying. Even though he has an ideological purpose, he doesn't want to give the game away.
Okay, because earlier in the book he says something like, well, yeah, once the have-nots overthrow the haves, then they become haves, and then there's
Right.
new
Right.
group of
Yeah,
have-nots in
it's
the
a
process.
cycle. Yeah, it's a cycle. Right.
And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, job security for Alinsky. But at the same
Yes,
time, it's like,
exactly.
no, he wants, I'm like,
But
is
he
he really
does have an
committed to this permanent
ideological,
revolution?
yes, he does have an ideological like end in mind. And he says Marx
So
doesn't
he
go far enough.
so he
So,
would like to like overthrow the current order, but then
well, I
put in
think
an order that would be permanent. Is
Well, I think by dedicating
that
the
what he
book to
wants?
Lucifer, he makes it clear like what his actual goal is the destruction of humanity, not the actual flourishing of anyone, right? So, hey, let me ask you a question about that podcast though. The Modernism 101 Lord of Spirits podcast, because there's something I've thought about with that podcast, and I've never you have more of a philosophical mind than I do, and you probably read more philosophy than I do. So he makes a Father Stephen DeYoung makes a comment about conservatives being more postmodern than liberals. And he talks about this a little bit, but he doesn't really expound on it. And it's something I would love to ask him about. If I ever decide to drive my butt down to Lafayette and go to liturgy, I will ask him about this. I just have to get the energy to get up early enough on a Sunday to do this. And so he mentions the conservatives, modern conservatives, are more postmodern than actual modern liberals. And so I'm wondering, and maybe you could fill in some of these blanks for me. So is he saying that the progressive mind, that the way that the progressive mind today works, and that the liberal mind, the way that it aims and progressivism aims, is an extension, a natural extension of the Enlightenment period, and that in order for conservatives to object to the goals of the progressives and of the Enlightenment, they must become then postmodernists and deconstruct.
I think that's part of the heart of it. Let me just say though, you are the Institute philosopher. I would never
I don't know about that.
want to
I'm
have
the
to put, it
I'm the
says so on our
resident
website.
truck driver.
I would never want to put uh my well, Plato, he liked to walk around and philosophize. You drive a truck. It's way cooler and philosophize.
Okay.
Um, we should come up with like a Greek. What's the Greek word for like driving a truck and be like that type of philosophy?
I don't know.
Um,
It maybe Ouroboros. Because that's what it feels like when you're driving a truck. It feels like a snake eating its own tail.
that's awesome. Um, that's really good stuff. Um, well, I think one thing they say in the in that episode that was really cool for me to hear was they were like, look, postmodernism is not Marxism. It's not
Oh yeah,
neo-Marxism.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Marxism is, they say, is peak modernism.
Yeah.
So for me, that was like, whoa. And they're like, there are very popular people in the culture who will tell you that it's, that postmodernism is basically rebranded Marxism. And they don't name anyone, but like someone who will tell you that is Jordan Peterson.
That's who he was talking about
There's
because he
another
was
guy.
on at that time. That was what, 2 years ago, I think that episode came out. Father Stephen
Yes.
DeYoung had actually been on tour with Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau, and that's why he mentioned
Whoa.
I've been on stage. I think John Vervaeke was another one that he was mentioning. I think he was on tour with him as well.
So I was like, oh, I wonder if he means Jordan Peterson. And I was like
Yeah.
gonna like look and see who he was on tour with. Okay, that's awesome. And there's another guy who Jordan Peterson likes, and I believe is interviewed before. Stephen Hicks, I think is his name. And he wrote a book called Postmodernism Explained.
Hmm.
And that book is basically, the theme of that book is that postmodernism is rebranded Marxism trying to destroy Western civilization. And
Oh,
what's funny about that is there's
what's
this
that other
other
guy's
book.
name? I'm sorry. What's that other guy's name that got popular with the right wing a few years ago when he was doing all this podcast about Marxism? And oh man, I can see his face and I can't think of his name. But he was also trying to he was trying to do the whole um intermingling of postmodernism and Marxism. And I cannot think of his name. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish what you're saying.
That's okay. Um, but there's a book called The Devil's Playground. No, no, sorry. I think it's called The Devil's Pleasure Palace.
I was going to say
And I
the
forget
Devil's
who wrote it.
Playground was Zbigniew Brzezinski. No, that's the Devil's Chessboard. Damn, the devil does too much.
No, he's doing a lot. But that book, like that book's basically the same book as Hicks's postmodernism explained,
Mm,
like there's this villain that's rebranded Marxism and is trying to destroy the West. But the villain in that book is the Frankfurt School, not the postmodernists.
mm,
But it's basically like the same story.
gotcha.
And then there's um, this idea that that Peterson puts forth that basically the Marxists realized that, oh, Marxism, you know, it doesn't work. Like this capitalism, it works. You know, they were like, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? No, it doesn't work in our theory. Our theory has been discredited. So they shifted from talking about like the economics and the material aspect of capitalism to talking about these power structures and these the oppressive group with race and ethnicity and sex and gender and all of that, which to me, like when they tell their story, like it feels very compelling. Like I know people who will tell you stuff that I would think of as like postmodern, and they also like hate capitalism. The people who tell you we need to smash the patriarchy, like they'll also tell you down with capitalism. And I'd never heard someone say that Marx is not just modernism, but peak modernism. And I
Yeah.
actually went to a friend who's a like a tenured philosophy professor who's guest like taught at Oxford University. And I asked her like, what's up with Marx being like a modernist? And she was like, well, I've never heard that before. So that was cool. I have some like speculation on why that would be. But one thing that they said on the Lower Spirits podcast is like, look, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but like if someone says like the word neo, they didn't put it like this, but this is my take on it. If someone says neo, it basically means not. Just hear that as not. So if someone says that guy's a neo-fascist, they do say this. Like that guy's a neo-fascist, and then he says, I'm not a fascist. I don't believe any of the stuff the fascists believed. And they go, yeah, because you're a neo-fascist
Hmm.
or a neo-conservative. That's someone who's not a conservative.
Yeah.
Or a neo-Reaganite foreign policy. That's a foreign policy that's got nothing to do with what Ronald Reagan was doing. So
Right.
then I was
Right.
like,
Right.
okay, so then neo-Marxism, not Marxism. But I can understand why, if you're a conservative or just a normal person, whatever, and you don't like the Marxists and you don't like the postmodernists, how you are conceiving of them as like the people who would tell you that like there's no objective reality, there's no objective morality. It's all just a power struggle. To ask the question is to entrap the oppressed minority in the game of power. Like you basically don't like those groups and you kind of see them as like the same.
Mm.
But what they're saying is modernity or the Enlightenment, it's characterized by a very abstract or an emphasis on this very abstract um, idea of the individual as the rational, autonomous being and emphasizing that above like the social order, society. And then certain ideological commitments, the idea that we're all blank slates, we're equal, we're basically the same. Any differences you observe are just
James
contingencies of
Lindsay.
history or how we were raised. Oh, okay. I don't know who that is, but I always see him posting crazy shit on
Yeah,
X.
that's who I was trying to think of a while ago. I am so sorry. It came to mind and I had to shoot it out my mouth before I forgot again.
No, that's good. Thank you. Because I see him always like posting crazy stuff, but and like attacking people we're friends with. Um, and
He
yeah,
was
he
one
is
of those
always
guys.
being like,
Remember a few years ago there were those guys that were like tenured professors that wrote that came up with those like weird freaking articles they were trying to get published in like psychological and science magazines that were like anti-science, but they were woke. So like the woke were publishing them, and they did like Mein Kampf in like woke form and got it published. Like he was one of those guys.
Okay.
Like, yeah, probably in like 2018, 2017, he popped up on the scene. He was on Rogan a few times. Yeah. Yeah. So he's one of those guys.
Oh, that's so great. So I'll definitely go check that out. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I love that
What did they
phenomenon
call
where
it?
there's like people that are,
Go ahead and finish what you're saying. I'm going to look up and see what they call that little scandal they were doing because it had a name, so it'd be easy to look into.
I'm always so fascinated when I see someone who's like I hate communism, and I'm like, yeah, me too. And then but then it's like they're saying all this other stuff that I think is wrong or crazy. They're attacking good people I know. And then there's the like the college kids who like I regard maybe basically as just like useful idiots, communists, but they're actually like interacting with issues in a way that seems more honest. And I'm like, it's such a bizarre field of like adversary and like potential ally. I can kind of empathize with the grand strategist of American empire where it's like, yeah, man, it's hard. Sometimes you got to work with Al Qaeda, you know? Sometimes they're on
Right.
your side with stuff.
Right. Here it is. It's right here. It's the grievance studies. What do they call it? The grievance studies affair. So here's a breakdown of it. James Lindsay and his co-authors submitted a rewritten version of portions of Mein Kampf as part of a hoax to a feminist journal, which was accepted for publication. This was done to highlight perceived biases in certain academic fields, particularly those they labeled as grievance studies. But yeah, I remember that. I can't remember who the other authors were. If I saw their names, let me see if I can. I would know their names if I saw them. But James Lindsay's the one who became the most popular in at least. Oh, Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose were the other two that worked with him on this whole thing. And what they were trying to do was prove that this whole like woke feminist like grievance studies kind of journals were nothing but fascism repackaged from a left-wing perspective. And you know, it made an impact and it was funny, but like these they were just kind of like dismissed as kooks and these journals didn't change any of their ways. So I don't know, but it was interesting and it was hilarious.
That is hilarious. And I remember that when that was happening, I thought it was so funny. And I remember like the defenders of the journals just being like, well, they defrauded the journals
Yeah,
and the fact
they
that they had to rewrite it.
they did a whole
It's not
one
like they
about rape culture at dog parks. It was just absurd shit. Like it was like, yeah, because your ideology is absurd. Like, come on, you know.
yeah, it's like the absurd ideology they're possessed with is just like scanning for like certain like words and phrases and ideas
Right,
and
exactly.
implications. So you do
And it's
your
like, oh
search
my
engine
God,
optimization.
the feminists have been talking about rape culture for years, but you found rape culture among dogs that exist at dog parks? Oh, we really got to like tackle this issue because this goes much deeper than the human condition. This is like drilled deep into our primal instincts. You know,
Like we
it's
knew we were right, but we didn't know we were this right.
yes, yeah. It's just it it was absurd. They did all kinds of, but yeah, that was James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose. I couldn't remember Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, but yes. Yes, I remember that. They were on Joe Rogan talking about that whole incident. Like, I think it was like 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. So,
I gotta go check this episode out.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. It was pretty funny. I think that was the last good thing James Lindsay ever did. Even though he's been on Michael Malice a few times, And I do find their conversations pretty interesting because James Lindsay has done a lot of study on Marxist ideologies and does understand the Marxist ideologies. He just he comes up with these weird freaking like he's the one who came up with the whole woke right idea. Like it's just like, okay, dude, like just because you had one idea that was like interesting and funny doesn't mean every idea you come up with is interesting and funny. So you got to kind of learn to like check yourself every once in a while. But you know, pride leads to the
Yeah, what
fall.
is this guy, Paul Wolfowitz?
Yeah.
As the great Scott Horton has pointed out, once upon a time, Paul Wolfowitz said something at a party that was right. And then from then on, everyone was like, this man's a genius. Put him in charge of something important in the empire. But then he was wrong every
About
single
everything
time after
else.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's dive back into
So,
this. Oh, go ahead.
so
I'm
like
sorry.
James, well, no, so like James Lindsay, Jordan Peterson, and all those guys that basically say that postmodernism is rebranded Marxism. Like I always found that really compelling, but I always kind of felt like it was missing something or something didn't quite fit. And so over at the Lord of Spirits podcast, they gave me a really good like sort of answer to that, or maybe like the beginning of an answer, where they're like,
Mm,
look, the Enlightenment, modernism, it's all about the individual as a blank slate. We're all equal. We're all the same. There's the noble savage. There's the ghost in the machine. These ideas and the scientific frame of reference becomes the one that's emphasized. That's how you adjudicate knowledge through rationalism and empiricism blended into the scientific method.
right.
So that, and they talk about like a, in the early 20th century, there were debates between the secular modernists and the fundamentalist Christians.
Mm,
But it was really kind of almost a fake debate because the modernist would say science has shown that there is no God. And then the fundamentalists would be like, no, science has shown that there is a God.
mm.
But then what they said on the podcast was
And the
they're
pre-modernists would be
buying
like,
into
what the
like
hell's science?
yeah, they're buying into the presupposition that science is what is how you get knowledge and how you get truth.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
I actually had this conversation with my wife the other day. We were talking about this and she brought up the Big Bang Theory and I just kind of shrugged it off because my wife, as orthodox as I am, she's still extremely atheist. And yeah, that's fine. We get along just fine. We have a perfectly good life. Neither of us are mad at the other person. But every once in a while she'll want to ask me questions. And she was asking me like about the Big Bang Theory and evolution and this, that, and the other. And I just kind of shrugged. I was just like, look, I was like, you put science as your highest priority. I don't put science as my highest priority. The way I look at it, science tells me how. The Bible tells me why. It's answering two different questions. I'm not interested in how. I'm into writing, I'm into symbolism. That's what I'm into. So I'm interested in the why. I'm not interested in the how. You are interested in the how. And I don't necessarily feel a desire to know that. And when you can break down your intellect in that way, it's freeing. It's like, okay, I don't have to know how God works. I don't even have to think that I have the capability of understanding how God works. All I'm interested in is why God works the way he does. And if you can look at religion and science as these two different parts of a larger whole, instead of looking at them as imposing forces, then it makes it a lot easier to come to a conclusion.
also, the Big Bang Theory is being revised by science to the point where they might even get rid of it.
Yeah,
I have a
I mean that's
friend.
beside the point. My whole point was is the how and the why, and look at these two things as working in conjunction together and not in opposition with each other. That's that's the real challenge is if both of these things are absolutely true. Let's just say that's just the way it is. If I told you, let's say I told you that I have a tree growing in my burn pile, yet every week I burn stuff in my burn pile. These are two facts. They're and though they seem opposing to each other, they work hand in hand with each other. And then it's like, okay, then I have to come to terms with the fact that that's how this works. I don't have to make a determination as to understanding how it works or why it works this way. I just have to understand that the Bible is not trying to tell me how the world was formed, it's telling me why the world was formed. And so, if I can come to terms with these two things and not look at them as oppositions to each other, I can look at them as working in conjunction with each other. Then I can say, okay, well, that puts a new landscape on the way that I view how God works. Because we may find it may be a material working to us, but then there's also something spiritual happening in the process. And so the why and the how don't necessarily contradict each other.
Have you seen the film Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Years ago, I think I was probably 12 when I saw it. Yeah, I was young. Yeah,
Well, they're trying to Indiana Jones is trying to find the Ark of the Covenant,
right.
and
It belongs in a
there's a
museum.
map. It belongs in the white man's museum. That's right. Um, you know it does. And so there's a map room that you have to get into, and you have to have this medallion and put it on a stick of a certain height that the medallion
Right.
tells you, and you put it in the little hole, and then when the sun rises, it shines through the medallion, its openings, and it illuminates where in the map room you're supposed to dig.
Yeah.
And Indiana Jones has the medallion, but the bad guys, they know what half the side is because it got burned into the bad guy's hand. But because they don't have the other side, they don't make their stick the right size. So they're digging in the wrong place.
Mm.
So I've been thinking about that as we have been going through this book and you've been bringing in the religious perspective, how, like in our society, there's there's a big emphasis on science and a big emphasis on like pushing out the religious perspective, where you're discouraged, at the very least, you're discouraged from looking at that perspective or having that perspective. And it might be really hostile. Like you can't bring that in here.
Hmm.
But I think, oh, it's like, so they're like digging in the wrong place.
Yeah.
They've got like, they've got part of the story. They've got this one perspective, but they don't have, when you bring in the other perspective, it really does like shine a lot of light on it. And it does really, like, oh, like that really like makes more sense. It's like in the Lord of Spirits podcast, and they're talking about, there's a really funny line. They're talking about the structuralists and the post-structuralists and this idea that like when you have a symbol referring to something, like say in the real world, there's always like a gap between it. And one of the fathers was like, yeah, I had a professor and he was like, oh, congratulations, you've discovered sin.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Because I've heard and I've read for years about this the slippage between the signifier and the signified. But to have someone say, "Oh, that's sin," like, oh, that really like spoke to me. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that if you were in certain circles of discourse, though, if you brought that up, they would try to shut you down.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, but like now what you're saying makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make as much sense when you freeze out that perspective.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
remember the last
so
time I was listening to that episode, actually, I was strapping down a trailer at work and I was strapping down a load on a trailer and he said that and I just fell to my knees and started laughing. I was like, that is so funny. I was actually strapping down shingles for like a load going to a store. I was like, I remember exactly where I was when I heard that line the last time. He said, "Oh, look, you've discovered sin," and I just started laughing. I was like, that is so funny. That is so interesting. That it's one of those things that even a professor has to admit. Like, yeah, you this is what you've like discovered.
congratulations, you
Yes.
reinvented the wheel. So with the modernist, yeah, emphasizing science as like the epistemic arbiter, then the postmodernists are they're the big thing they're attacking is the modern conception of objectivity, but they're also attacking the the emphasis on epistemology um, at all. And Stephen Hicks has some line where he's like the failure of epistemology is what made postmodernism possible. And so in the postmoderns, they shift from so for the pre-moderns, they emphasize metaphysics, the moderns emphasize epistemology, and then the postmoderns emphasize value. And so what they said in the podcast is this really like spoke to me the second time I listened or the third time I listened to it. It's the liberal Protestants or the modernism gives you liberal Protestants and then sort of in general liberal Christians. The postmoderns, that's uh the evangelicals, the political evangelicals who got involved in as a vote as like a voting bloc, got
Mm,
involved in supporting politicians, and they would always talk about values, family values. And they're saying not that that's bad, but just that their argument was basically like this is what we value. That's their starting point is what we value.
hmm
And that yeah, to your point, they're reacting against modernity. And maybe not necessarily consciously. I wasn't exactly sure what the fathers are saying about this, but they're basically saying like, yeah, look, there's the impulse to react against the moderns and to want to go back to being pre-modern, but you can't go back to being pre-modern. So you end up getting into this postmodern path that can lead you where all you have is subjectivity and basically like violence. Like this is what we value
Right.
and we're going to fight for it. Not
Right.
so I thought that was really interesting because yeah, I would never have thought of like postmodern, like the right is against postmodern. That's the thing of the left because they're all Marxists.
Yes.
But they're like, no,
Well, it's like,
it's more
do you remember a couple of years ago the libertarian mantra started coming out? And there were a bunch of libertarian. I might have even had it done a conversation on this, but I remember Pete had talked about this, and there were a bunch of kind of libertarian podcasters talking about this. Must have been in 2019, maybe early 2020, talking about intentional communities. Do you remember this?
I do
Okay.
not.
So there was this whole idea of the libertarian mind. Rod Dreher had written a book. Oh, I can't remember what Rod Dreher's book was called, and I have it on audiobook. But so Rod Dreher had written a book. He was Catholic at the time, and he had written a book about intentional societies and creating like homeschool programs to where like in your community all the homeschool moms are working together and getting together and bringing the kids together to socialize and have like, I don't know, baseball teams and soccer teams and all these different social aspects. And then having community farming and sharing vegetables and blah, blah, blah. And when I was in Kansas City, this is what I saw Father Turbo's church doing. Right. And I was like, I remember just a few years ago, all the libertarians were talking about this exact thing. And I would guarantee you, I remember I went on my buddy Matt Erickson's podcast, King Pilled, and talked with him. And I was sitting here in my office and I was watching my chickens run outside and he was like, "Oh, Tommy's one of the ones doing it right. He's growing his own vegetables, he's growing his own fruits, he's got his own chickens, blah blah blah." But no other libertarians did anything other than talk about it. It wasn't like a thing. They weren't bringing communities together and creating intentional communities. They were just telling you what you should do. And I'm looking at the Orthodox ethos and the way that the Orthodox, like I want to use the word attack, but it's not attack. It's engage with society. The Orthodox are all about engaging with society from a true Christian perspective and living a true Christian life as an example for the rest of society. And that all starts as an internal struggle and an internal battle. So there's not so much pointing the finger elsewhere at other people saying, you got to fix you. It's like I told you in the last podcast we did, it's an experiential thing. And it's like, you have to, your experience of me has to change so that you want to encounter what I've encountered. And so there's this whole like lost kind of like philosophy when you start getting into the modernism and the postmodernism and many of the what the conservatives want is to discover that. They're trying to uncover that, but they're trying to uncover that through material means and not spiritual means. And you're never going to find it materialistically. You're just going to end up like starting a commune and a cult.
They're digging in the wrong place.
Exactly. Their sticks the wrong
You
length.
said last time, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like Rome wasn't converted through violence or
Right.
maybe through political
No, it was
organizing.
converted through violence. It wasn't converted through the Christians committing violence. It was through the Christians accepting violence. It was the blood of martyrs that converted Rome. It wasn't the blood of emperors.
Damn, that's deep. I'll be thinking about that for months.
So,
But so yeah, you saw you visited this church and you saw people actually living out
dude, they
what
have their own
libertarian.
Eden in the middle of a ghetto in Kansas City. Seriously.
But then libertarians are like, I mean, especially with like the Libertarian Party, even if you like take it seriously, which I don't, its premise is like, oh, we need to organize politically. We need to get our guy the president and then he'll make everything okay.
Yeah, and my argument isn't our country's problem is not materialistic. We have all the material desires we could ever want. We have everything. We have as much money and wealth and fame and fortune and everybody's comfortable. We could like there's nothing materialistically our country is not wanting for anything. The problem with the America is not material. It's spiritual. It's a spiritual issue. Nobody's willing to fix themselves. Nobody's willing to dig into their own lives and bring themselves in front of the spiritual healer and say, I'm broken. I need to be fixed. Everybody who thinks that they're going to earn their way to freaking freedom, and that's not the way it works. Because freedom is not a material condition. I mean, when Saint Gabriel the Fool was burning the icon of Lenin in front of freaking, in Moscow, it wasn't done because he thought that he was going to get material wealth. It was done because I don't worship the same gods you worship. These idols you put before me mean nothing to me. This isn't the God I worship. This is the God of the material world. The whole, I mean, whether it be a capitalist venture or a communist venture, it's all about material wealth. It's none of it's about a spiritual enlightenment. It's all about material wealth. The communists are envious of the wealthy. So they want to steal from the wealthy because they believe that if this material environment that we have is is given out properly and distributed evenly amongst everyone in the world, then everybody will be at the same amount of happiness. But what they found is it doesn't bring everybody up to the same amount of happiness, it brings everybody down to the same amount of misery. Because happiness isn't found through the material possessions of the world. And this is what everybody's missing whenever we're going. I mean, going through this book, going through anything, all we're talking about are the material conditions that are around us and how to appropriately distribute these material conditions so that everybody is exponentially happy. And the libertarians just say, well, nobody's going to be exponentially happy, so we have to be exponentially free. And what does that matter? Why does it matter if we're free if there's no happiness? Like, what is the point of that? Well, your freedom will allow you to then traverse down whatever path that you personally choose in order to extrapolate whatever happiness that you can extrapolate. Yeah, but what if you're a fucking idiot? You don't know how to find happiness and you go down the wrong path and end up a drug addict laying in a gutter. Like that, like I don't want to like my brother's a drug addict. I don't want to see anybody in that position. Right? Like it's like what part it's not loving to allow somebody to self-destruct. Just sitting back and watching someone self-destruct and say, "Well, he has the freedom to do so." That I mean, like, what good does that do? Then it destroys the people around him. Like that doesn't seem like a recipe for success. And that's what
This
we've
is why
done
I
in
think
that's what we've done in this nation though. That's what we've done in this country. We've been like, well, he has the freedom to choose to be a woman even though he was born a man. Oh, well, he has the freedom to shoot up heroin on the side of the road. Oh, he has the freedom to shit on the sidewalk. Like it becomes a menace for everybody around them.
and that's the modernist commitment to this abstraction of the individual,
Right.
and that the individual is real and society is just something that's made up. And then there's no way to even really talk about social order, appropriate order as justice. Um, even if
Well,
you're like,
it's because all of these ideologies take a piece of Christianity and they pollute them. They're like, well, this piece sounds really good, right? So if I tell you salvation is communal, you could easily be like, well, the communists must have been right. But no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying salvation is communal. Well, how is that? It's because Christ said, like, as you feed the least of these, you feed me. As you clothe the least of these, you clothe me. It's about an individual act in a communal structure. So there's both and, it's not either or. So, yes, the individual is important, but so is the community. And it's like the only ideology that ties both of these things together is that ideology that is is passed down to us from the kingdom of heaven. It's not the ideologies that take place in the politics around us. We're never going to read these 18 pages. We're just going to sit here and talk all night.
this is good stuff.
I'm glad you think so. Some people are probably like, this guy preaching to us.
I
You're not a
wanted to hear the
preacher.
book.
Did
Read the
you
book.
did you get a blessing from your spiritual father to preach? No, I did not. I'm just talking. He knows I do my podcast. If he wants to come bitch at me, he can listen to what I have to say and be like, "Sir, you were wrong." But uh I should dig in back into this. Okay.
Let's read
I
a few
first
more lines at least before we.
Yeah, before we go off the into another
Yeah.
rant, because we can go down these rabbit holes all night long. I first learned this lesson during the 1930 Depression, when the United States experienced a revolutionary upheaval in the form of a mass labor union organizing drive known as the CIO. This was the radical wing of the labor movement. It espoused industrial unionism while the conservative and archaic AF of L clung to craft unionism. The position of the AF of L excluded the masses of workers from union organization. The battle cry of the CIO was organize the unorganized. Very quickly, the issue was joined with the gargantuan automobile industry, which was at that time an open shop and completely unorganized. The first attack was against the behemoth of this empire, General Motors. A sit down strike was launched against Chevrolet. John L. Lewis, then the leader of the CIO, told me that at the height of this sit down strike, he heard a rumor that General Motors had met with both Ford and Chrysler to advance the following proposition: we at General Motors are fighting your battle for. If the CIO beats us, then you're next in line and there will be no stopping them. Now we are willing to let the CIO sit in at Chevrolet until hell freezes and suffer that loss in our profits if you will hold your production of Fords and Plymouths, the price class competitors to the Chevrolet, to your present market. On the other hand, we cannot hold out against the CIO if you boost production in order to sell to all potential Chevrolet customers who will buy your products because they cannot get Chevrolets. Lewis, who was an organizational genius with a rare insight into the power mechanics of the status quo, dismissed it with a perceptive comment. It doesn't matter whether this is a false rumor or true, he said, because neither Ford nor Chrysler could ever agree to overlook an opportunity for an immediate increase in their profits and power, short sighted as it might be. The the internecine struggle among the haves for their individual self-interest is as short-sighted as internecine struggle among the have-nots. I have on occasion remarked that I feel confident that I could persuade a millionaire on a Friday to subsidize a revolution for Saturday, out of which he would make a huge profit on Sunday, even though he was certain to be executed on Monday. Once one understands this internal battle for power within the status quo, one can begin to appraise effective tactics to exploit it. It is sad to see the stupidity of inexperienced organizers who make gross errors by failing to have even an elementary appreciation of this pattern. An example is to be found just a couple of years ago during the height of the rising tide of the struggle for civil rights, certain civil rights leaders in Chicago declared a Christmas boycott on all the department stores downtown. The boycott was a disastrous failure, and any experienced revolutionary could have predicted without any reservations that this would have been the case. Any attack against the status quo must use the strength of the enemy against itself. Let us examine this particular boycott. The error was in trying to boycott all instead of some. Few liberals, white or black, would forego all Christmas shopping in the most attractive shopping places, even if it had not been the Christmas season. We know that picket lines are relatively ineffective today in stopping the general population. There is a low degree of identification on the part of the general population with the labor movement or with picket lines in general. However, even that low degree can be exploited by placing a picket line in front of only one department store. If the same merchandise can be purchased at the same price at another department store across the street, the slight uneasiness that the picket line creates can affect a significant number of customers. They have an easy enough, visible enough alternative. They will cross the street. The power squeeze comes when the picketed department stores sees a number of customers going across to its competitors. This calculated maneuvering of the power of one part of the halves against its other parts is central to strategy. In a certain sense, it is similar to the have not nations playing off the USA against the USSR. Their own petard. The basic tactic in warfare against the haves is a mass political jujitsu. The have nots do not rigidly oppose the haves, but yield in such planned and skillful ways that the superior strength of the haves becomes their own undoing. For example, since the haves publicly pose as the custodians of responsibility, morality, law, and justice, which are frequently strangers to each other, they can be constantly pushed to live up to their own book of morality and regulations. No organization, including organized religion, can live up to the letter of its own book. You can club them to death with their book of rules and regulations. This is what the great revolutionary Paul of Tarsus knew when he wrote to the Corinthians, who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, for the letter killeth. That's not what Paul was talking about. But Paul was actually making a slight to the Pharisees, which he was a Pharisee before um, his road to Damascus moment. Um, and what he was saying is, if all you do is go through the motions and don't encompass the actual heart of what these laws mean, then you're not doing anything. Going through the motions is not the same thing as encompassing full heartedly what the law is. So that's what Paul was saying. But you can misconstrue him all you want.
It's shocking that the guy who quoted or gave a shout out to Lucifer at the beginning of his book would then aggressively misrepresent St. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the entire letter to the Corinthians in context, it's not that hard to understand what Paul is saying. He's taking he's taking for granted the fact that whoever's reading this book is not going to go and look and see what Paul actually said and what he was actually like addressing, right? So I mean, it's pretty it's kind of like It's kind of like any politician you look at that makes a promise and then breaks that promise and then shrugs it off because they didn't wholly encompass what that promise meant to their supporters, right? So that's what he's saying. He's saying you can live by the letter of the law and you can go through the motions, but if you don't fully in have that law indwell within you and let it mold your heart, then going through the motions, it's like if I say I love my wife, but and I go through the motions of loving my wife, but I don't actually encompass love for my wife within myself, it's not going to take her very long to see through what I'm doing as just going through the motions. Like you can tell when you're being condescended. And that's what he's saying. He's saying you cannot condescend God. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, you had said something in a previous episode we did about
Who
the
the hell is turning in my driveway? You have made a wrong turn. I have two monster dogs. I advise you to turn around now. I don't know. I don't know who this is. Nobody comes to my house. Like I live down this long driveway. When you turn into my driveway, even people that have been invited to my house call me and go, "Hey, I turned down this dirt road and there's a house down there. Is that you?" So, like if you turn down my driveway, you have made a wrong turn. They are coming down here, potholes and all. They're just, you're in a little bitty car too. I can tell by where your lights are. Turn around. You are not welcome here. Oh, my dogs are going to go crazy in a minute when they hear that car out there. Anyway, what were you saying? I'm sorry, that was distracting.
Do you need to go intervene?
No, just let these people figure it out on their own. They get two
Well, you
big
had talked to
blue pit. No, they're backing up now. They're like, okay, I don't belong here.
they chose wisely. You had talked about like the father being the priest of the family,
Uh-huh.
and you had talked about um like wanting the best for your spouse. And I was thinking about how I know guys who it's almost like their mentality when they wake up is, oh God, like what boxes do I need to check today to not get bitched at by my wife? Instead of like, oh, how can I contribute to her having a good day? How can I help her pursue the good things that she's pursuing? And then I was connecting it to this idea that our military affairs analyst at the Institute, William Buber, talks about. I forget what the word is. I think it's a German word, but basically the idea is if you're in the, especially in the military, though I think this would apply to any organization, but especially when you're in the military, like the commanders want the men under them to like understand what the mission is
Mm,
and really deeply like embody that. So that in real time they can make good decisions, not just like not just following orders, not just checking boxes, not just, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do if this happens, but to really buy into the mission.
yeah.
I thought that was a cool,
Oh, there go the
cool way to
dogs.
think about that.
Yeah, the person kept driving down the driveway, and now my dogs are like, what is that noise? There's someone here. Sorry.
Did they back up though?
No, they backed up a little bit and then they kept coming. And I was like, oh, God. So I
Oh
texted my
man.
wife real quick and I was like, hey, there's a car outside. You don't have to open the door. I was just letting you know because I don't know who that is. Do you want me to go check? Do you want me to go check who that is? Well, this is private. I'm going to put a sign that says private property out there. And I'll just I got that Walther 22. I'll just start popping tires if somebody comes down here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Everybody's listening to me talking to my wife and they only hear my side of the conversation. How nice is that? So they're leaving. They're like, oh, get me out of here. Okay. So, all right. Uh, my driveway is not the easiest to get down either. And they're in a little bitty car. They're going to tear up their suspension, but whatever. All right. So you were saying Bill Buford, he's talking about putting your heart
Yeah,
into
there's some,
the, oh, go ahead.
well, just into the mission,
Right. Yeah, you have to be into
understanding
well,
what the
and so
mission actually is.
that's why the military builds you the way they do, right? So the military builds you in a way to where your dedication, yes, you are proud to be a member of the United States military, but you're not a proud to be a member of the United States military in on your own. You're proud to be a member of the United States military because you love your brother. So you fight for that guy on your right and your left. So your dedication to that mission is about that brotherhood that you've built with those people within your community. So I
I was
mean,
thinking about that.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
That
that's
does make
pretty
sense.
much.
And it reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you.
Yep.
You had said early on in this series about how the state sees itself as threatened by the family and the church.
Yes.
And so that's why you see it undermining those institutions.
Absolutely.
But then it seems like maybe it's a paradox or a contradiction or something, but where the state it's leveraging the narrative of the family. So it's like, okay, it's almost like, yeah, now you're a band of brothers fighting for the founding fathers and Uncle Sam and that almost like the state would like just become the family, but
The state would become daddy.
the state would become daddy. But it's almost like it needs the real family to like to feed off of.
Where
So if
yeah,
it
but
actually
well, but where do single mothers get their income from?
from the state,
Yeah. They don't want them to be
but like
dependent
where
on the father because like the father teaching the morals of his childhood, of his upbringing, of his culture don't necessarily mesh with the way the state would want the child to be raised, right? So the mother no longer educates the children, the state educates the children. The the father no longer provides for the children, the state provides for the children, right? So
so with the
there's
state,
like this it's the great replacement only greater.
so does the state is the state sort of by its very nature its intention to just make the entire social order within the state.
I don't think that's its very nature, right? Because if you look at like the in the Old Testament, right? And so you go through like Judges and there's a spot where it says every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's not a good thing. Like men, like if you're doing what's right in your own eyes, like that's chaos, right? So then the people of Israel began to beg for a king, but they wanted a king that would bring them to war and conquer other nations the way that other nations kings brought their nations to war and conquered other nations. And God was telling them, "No, that's not the type of king I want to give you." Right? And so the king that he gave them was David. Now David wasn't perfect. He was flawed, but that came after they had already like brought in their own king. They brought in what was it? Was it Saul? They brought in, and was a complete failure. And so David had to come in and take over and kind of bring the nation back to God's favor. And then after David, it began to like diminish off. And it's not because there was no state required for the people, it's because the state that the people were requesting was not good for them. And so the nature, I would say, there's no nature to a state, but if the state is like a secularized, materialistic, like encompassed by the material, then that state will necessarily be detrimental to the well-being of the people. You see what I'm saying?
See what you're saying? Because I'm thinking, okay, if the state is educating the children or most of the children, and the state is providing material support to single
At its
moms.
nature, these ideas are not bad. If the state, let's say if we lived in a state that was run like a church, let's just say, for instance, I don't care, just pick a church, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could, like, any number of churches are better than this state, like the government of the United States. But let's say you had, like, let's just say you had the Catholic Church, the Pope was the head of the state. It would probably be a more humane, better society than what we live in today. If everyone adhered to that cultural like aspect. The problem we have right now is everybody looks, or not everybody, but the majority of people look at the state as the solution to the cultural problems that they have. So they're looking to the state to do things that are not within the state's purview, that the state isn't good at. What is the state there for? The state there is there to protect the homeland, right? So if you look at the Byzantine Empire, they had the double-headed eagle. Why did they have the double-headed eagle as their logo? Well, it's because one head represents the emperor and the other head represents the patriarch. So the church and the state were equals in authority, right? So we have what we call separation of church and state in our nation now, where the church is not only below the government, but it's outside of the government. It's outside of the purview of society, of culture. It's like a counterculture movement to be part of the church. You see what I'm saying? It's not even like considered mainstream culture. You're not even supposed to take into consideration your political beliefs when you go vote. A lot of people would say. And so the state is the all-encompassing authority that the church then falls underneath. But in a nice equal society, you would have the state and the, like, answering to the church just as the church answers to the state. There would be a give and take, like a marriage, right? In your marriage, you're not like wielding a freaking iron fist over your wife. That's not the way it works, right? It's like I was telling you in the last podcast about how St. John Chrysostom like broke down marriage in homily 20 when he's talking about the man is the head and the woman as the body, much like Christ is the head and the church is the body. And I said, you could even like drill that in even deeper, whereas the man is the head and the woman is the heart. And without the head, the heart doesn't have vision or hearing to protect it from outside influences. But without the heart, the head becomes Stalin, right? And we're living in a society right now that only has a head. It has no heart. Without the church, there's no heart at the top of the food chain in our authority structure. So that double-headed eagle is almost a necessity in maintaining the stability of the head and the heart. And for the state to not become psychopathic, because it's only pursuing what it conceives as good outcomes without any compassion or empathy or sympathy.
The historian of reason, Mark Ajita, talks a lot about how the archaic, he calls them the archaic states, or the first states that we know about after um, the agricultural revolution and the rise of the first civilizations. And he says that like in those societies, the state and the church, it's all the same thing. If you were to say to them, they couldn't comprehend either of those examples you gave of like our separation of church and state, where the church is outside the state, or even the Byzantine, where there's two eagle heads, the church and the state. It's just one head, but it's all together, so that the rulers are the priests are the rulers.
Mm.
Um, and this is pre-Christian. Is there something about Christianity that changes that perspective, or would the the society be better if in fact it was like that, except with a Christian um uh religion?
Yeah, it would look like that.
So that is the archaic state, is 1984.
Yeah.
The archaic pre-modern, or not even pre-modern, pre-modern.
Yeah, it is. It's just the head. There's no heart. Like when you talk about when you talk about like a serial killer, somebody who's a psychopath or um, a sociopath, you talk about somebody who's calculating and manipulates, but they don't feel any emotion. They don't. There's no care. There's no love. There's no nurturing involved in what they do. Right? The state, the head without the heart, that's what it is. It's calculating and manipulating. It's out for its own desires. It's not, it doesn't take into consideration the needs and desires of other people. So if you say by like the nature of the state is, I would say, well, the nature of the state of any given place is the collective zeitgeist of the people. And that doesn't
Spirit
mean,
of the people.
right. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean that everyone within the society is a sociopath or a psychopath, but it means that there's a majority of people that wish that to be the way that they're led, right? It's, there's this everything like we've heard it said for years that politics is downstream from culture, but nobody took that into consideration of the what it actually meant. They just thought if you go in and you start playing punk rock and get rid of trannies, that your politics would fix itself. But that's not what it is. It's like Saying that politics is downstream of culture means that what's accepted within the culture is a reflection of what you're going to accept in your politics. And if you're accepting your attorney general okaying the handing out of needles to drug addicts on the side of the road, that's going to lead to drug addicts on the side of your roads. And then you're going to get, what you have in LA or what you have in Oregon or what you have in Washington. You're going to get the disorder. And then you're going to have people say, well, this is unacceptable. We don't like our streets looking like this. So we have to elect somebody who's going to bring back order. And they all do it in the name of compassion, but none of them have any compassion. We talked about how ICE was going into Minneapolis, or how Trump was sending in the National Guard into these states to clean up the streets of these cities, right? It was all done in the name of compassion, but it was done without compassion. And it's because there's no spiritual directive, there's no spiritual direction that's required for the leaders of a state or a city or our country to actually work with, to come up with a strategy that is at the same time compassionate for those that don't want the disorder and for those that are causing the disorder. But everything that happens legally, as Father Peter Heers has said, should be for the salvation of everyone involved, not only the victim, but also the perpetrator. That should be what we want. We should want the salvation of everyone, because we're all made in God's image. And it doesn't mean that there aren't some people that are too far gone. There are. But it doesn't mean that everybody that makes a mistake and commits a crime is too far gone. And without the church working side by side with the state, you don't get that. So there's this like holistic approach. Father Turbo told me, I was talking to him, and he's like, I was talking to him about like somebody being like, if your body's failing you and you begin to have like mental problems due to your body failing you, how do you approach that? And he said, the problem isn't mental or physical, it's spiritual, because it's a holistic approach. Your mental is part of your body. So that's all physical. So you got to take the physical and the spiritual and attack this from a holistic approach. If you just solve the physical problems and ignore the spiritual issues, you're still going to be lacking. It's a holistic approach. You have to attack these issues holistically. And if we're only, as St. Paul said, if we're only going through the motions, if we're only doing the activities that it requires without the heart to fix the problem, without that spiritual like fulfillment and holistic approach, it's going to backfire and it's never going to be right. And you're going to keep going left to right, to left to right, to left to right, to left to right, and it's never going to be fixed. You're going to be on a pendulum the entire time. because the problem isn't just physical, it's spiritual and physical. And you got to holistically attack these issues. And it starts with each individual person, right? It was Saint Seraphim of Savrov says that I'm probably going to get this quote wrong, so don't crucify me, but he said something like, for a person to acquire the spirit of peace saves 10,000 people or saves thousands around him, something like that. But you have to acquire the spirit of peace to save those people around you. You don't do it by just acting a certain way and just going through the motions. That's not the way this works. And our entire state, the way that the federal government of the US works, is we just keep insisting they go through the motions, and we don't have to have a change of heart as people on the individual level in the community as citizens. And then we get mad because our politicians are corrupt. Well, they're only corrupt because they're representing a corrupt people that refuses to get right. So, yeah, I told you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, that was kind of an uncomfortable silence. I'm going to read now. Let us take, for example, the case of the civil rights demonstrations of 1963 in Birmingham, when thousands of Negro children stayed out of school to participate in the street demonstrations. The Birmingham Board of Education dusted off its book of regulations and threatened to expel all children absent for this reason. Here, the civil rights leaders erred, as they did on other vital tactics, by backing off instead of rushing in with more demonstrations and pressing the Birmingham Board of Education between the pages of their book of regulations by forcing them to live up to the letter of their regulations and statements. The board and the city of Birmingham would have been in an impossible situation with every Negro child expelled and loose on the streets. If they didn't reverse themselves before they acted, they would have reversed themselves one day later. Another dramatic failure to understand tactics came during the second Chicago public school boycott in 1964, a struggle against a de facto segregated public school system. We know that the efficacy of any action is in the reaction it evokes from the haves, so that the cycle of it so that the cycle escalates in a continuum of conflict. Lacking any reaction from the haves except public notice of the numbers of children involved. Effects of the boycott were significantly over by the next day. This boycott was what I call a terminal tactic, one that crests, breaks, and disappears like a wave. Terminal tactics do not arouse the reaction that is essential for the development of a conflict. A terminal tactic is to be exercised only to finish a conflict, for it is ineffective in the development of the rhythm of give and take that one must have while stepping up the war and building the movement. Civil rights leaders could console themselves with the psychological carryovers, public display of support, and similar prayerful hopes. But as for carrying on the conflict for integration, that was over and done with by the next day. Nice memory. Excuse me. In Chicago, the haves slipped badly when both a judge and a district attorney muttered that the book of regulations banned attempts to induce the absence of public school students and growled ominously about an injunction against all civil rights leaders taking part in the development of the boycott. Here, as always, whenever the haves start living by their book, they present a golden opportunity to the have nots to transform what had been a terminal tactic into a sweeping advance on many fronts. The children wouldn't need to be absent. The leaders would be the only people who need to act. Now was the time to start an intensive campaign of ridicule, insults, and taunting defiance, daring the district attorney and the judge either to live up to their regulations and issue the injunctions or stand publicly exposed as fearful frauds who were afraid to put the law where their mouths were. Such behavior on the part of the have nots would probably have resulted in the injunction. But by this time, the boycott tactic would have had shaking consequences. Immediately following the boycott, every civil rights leader in the city of Chicago involved in it would have been in violation of the court injunction. But the last thing that the establishment wants is to indict and imprison every single civil rights leader, which would have included leaders of every religious organization in town. In the city of Chicago, such a step would have shaken the power structure of Chicago and certainly put the entire issue of school segregation policy on the line. Without any question, the district attorney and the judge would have had to depend on postponements in the hope that everybody would just forget about it. At this point, now that the civil rights leaders had the powerful weapon of the book of laws of the haves, they would have to stand fast publicly, once again taunting, insulting, demanding that the judge and the district attorney obey the law. Charging that the district attorney and the courts had issued an injunction which they had publicly, willfully, and maliciously violated, and that they therefore must be compelled to pay the penalties for this action. If the civil rights leaders insisted that they be arrested and tried, the haves would be on the run and in complete confusion, caught in the straitjacket of their own book. Enforcement of their injunction would have resulted in a citywide storm of protest and a rapid growth in the organization. Non enforcement would have signaled a breakdown and retreat of the haves from the have nots, and also resulted in swelling the size and force of the have not organization. Time in jail. I'm going to take a drink. Say something.
So I do, it makes sense to me. Like, if I was the district attorney, that I wouldn't want to lock up everybody. But it does seem like if I was in that position, I would be really annoyed if Alinsky and the boys were trying to like play my own book against me, and like I'd be like, wow, they're so cute, they're so clever. Um, but I'm going to crush them, is how I think I would think. And it's weird that when I see like these people just giving in to such tactics. But then, I mean, to what you were saying before, if you really start thinking like that, you're going to lose your heart. You're going to be Stalin. And then, yeah, you're going to crush people. And that's it's only possible to be Stalin if you have enough people in the society that find certain things acceptable. I don't know what the numbers are, but because it's a coalitional thing.
Right.
Like to say that Stalin had all this power, that means that he's got this high status within this coalitional project.
Well, and it tells you something about the population, right? I've made this comparison before that excuse me, that Putin has to pretend to be Christian. Whether he's actually truly an Orthodox Christian or not, there is enough social pressure within Russia that he has to at least put on the face of an Orthodox Christian and act as an Orthodox Christian within society, because that is the only authority that they see as legitimate within their society. Right? So the actions the of the leader of a nation tell you a lot about what that nation is willing to accept and to allow within their nation. If there were enough people upset about the Iran war, there would be calls for impeachment of Donald Trump. But there aren't enough people upset with the Iran war. I hear you. Hold on one second. Can you talk? I'll be able to hear you. My dog is throwing a fit. He locked himself out of the house and off the porch. So I have to go
Oh
let
yeah,
his
yeah.
ass in because I can hear him whining all the way in here and it is driving me berserk.
Let him in.
Oh, my wife got him. Never mind. Go ahead and talk, Joe.
Oh, good, good. Um, well, that's funny because when you were saying that about Putin, it made me think about how people would say, years ago, I'd hear people say, in Iran, they say they say death to America. And then someone would say, yeah, but they just say that when they're running for office to get elected. Don't worry about it. And I was like, well, doesn't make it better. You're
Yeah.
saying to get elected, you have to say death to America. And of course, that narrative is being perhaps overemphasized
Right.
by the war party in the United States.
Right. Right.
And like, why would they be mad at us in the first place? But just the idea that like, oh, to get elected, politicians have to like do certain things.
Right.
But it's
Yes.
like that's really
Well,
important.
our
The things you have to
politicians
do
have
that
to
you have
cater
to
to
say.
Israel.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
okay.
running for Congress because I love this
And
country.
look
And
at
by
what
this country, I
Israel
mean Israel.
does. Look what Israel does to the countries around it. Look what it's done to Lebanon. Like, I mean, it's like Donald Trump made that comment to Bill O'Reilly that one time when he said, and you think we're so innocent? I mean, Bill O'Reilly's Putin's a killer. And Donald Trump looks at him, he goes, you think we're so innocent? Like,
And they
no
were
matter
like, this
what you
man
think
is
of Donald Trump, like comments like that are why people like him because it's like at least he's telling the truth about some of this
they
stuff.
accuse him of moral equivalency.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're saying it's the same thing when they do it and we do it?
Yeah.
Nuh-uh, because we're
Yeah.
us.
No, no. Because we're killing people that are only three quarters the image of God. They're killing people that are one and a half the image of God. Like it's like, yeah, whatever,
I
man. Like, but I read that section. So reading that section up here about the injunction and sending the haves to jail just makes me think every time I read it and I hear it, like listening to the audiobook and everything, I just think Alinsky is so naive. There's obviously two tiers of justice in the United States. The haves are not going to face the same consequences the have nots face. Like just the naivety of like writing that. Like I would never even try to publish those words to make it sound like, well, now we're going to have to put the haves in jail. No, obviously they're going to get off. Obviously, that's what happens. Like we all know how the story works. And either when he wrote this book in the what was it, the 50s or 60s, like either it was like the nation was that much different then than it is now, and it's just become that much more corrupted, which tells you something about the citizenry, or he was just naive.
this
I
is
don't know
what
which it is.
this is what I can't wrap my head around. Is like, yeah, I interpret a lot of this book that way too, that he's really naive. But then you're pointing out how the Democratic Party has taken this book and been really successful with it.
Yeah.
So it's like he's on to something. This isn't just like some naive work to be dismissed.
No, and it's really,
But
I only see the naivety whenever he gets into details. It's like, for the most part, he's just drawing out a blueprint. But when he starts writing down, like, he's like, okay, for example, let's take and you like, I look at his examples and I'm like, dude, like, you really think that's how that's going to work? Because that's not how that's going to work. That's not how this works. You got to remember who was that? Who was he was the mayor of Chicago and he was a Democratic mayor of Chicago. And he was just like, yeah, if you riot, we're going to shoot. Daley, Mayor Daley. Like back in the
When the
day,
looting
like our
starts, the shooting
politicians did
starts.
not play around. Like they would have you forget. There was a mayor in Philadelphia that had an entire community bombed. Like, what are you talking about? so so some of it is naivety. I'm just like, okay, dude, I don't think you understand the repercussions of taking these people to task. Some of these people will have you killed. Like, so I don't know. But all right. Time in jail. The reaction of the status quo in jailing revolutionary leaders is in itself a tremendous contribution to the development of the have not movement, as well as to the personal development of the revolutionary leaders. This point should be carefully remembered as another example of how mass jujitsu tactics. I cannot read the word with jujitsu without hearing Dustin Poirier saying, "Who don't know jujitsu?" Like every time I read the word jujitsu, that's what I hear. This point should be carefully remembered as another example of how mass jujitsu tactics can be used to so maneuver the status quo that it turns its power against itself. Jailing the revolutionary leaders and their followers performs three vital functions for the cause of the have nots. One, it is an act on the part of the status quo that in itself points up the conflict between the haves and the have nots. Two, it strengthens immeasurably the position of the revolutionary leaders with their people by surrounding the jailed leadership with an aura of martyrdom. Three, it deepens the identification of the leadership with their people since the prevalent reaction among the have nots is that their leadership cares so much for them and is so sincerely committed to the issue that it is willing to suffer imprisonment for the cause. Repeatedly, in situations where the relationship between the have nots and their leaders has become strained, the remedy has been the jailing of the leaders by the establishment. Immediately, the ranks close and the leaders regain their mass support. See, even here, he's recognizing how instrumental martyrdom is and how powerful martyrdom is. And we understand this instinctually, right? Look at what happened after George Floyd was killed. They started making monuments to him and making icons, painting icons on buildings, and holding ceremonies outside these icons, venerating him and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, like this crackhead died, but it was powerful. It was a powerful movement. You know, martyrdom is extremely powerful if it's utilized. And the right even tried to do that with Charlie Kirk. If you remember when Charlie Kirk was shot, like all you heard from like Jack Posobiec and all these guys with TPUSA was Charlie Kirk was a martyr and blah, 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 blah. It's just that people on the right aren't like gullible enough to just think that anybody that gets killed is a martyr because martyrdom actually has a definition to us.
But that was funny that there was like a time period, maybe like a month or two, where on X guys kept seeing like, this person got fired because they posted in like favor of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or this person got fired because they're making fun of it. And then someone posted a meme. It was like Neo from the Matrix. Uh, Neo means not. Callback to our earlier conversation, but Neo from the Matrix. So not whatever the creator. I'm not saying anything. I'm saying whatever they were trying to
Right,
say. He
right.
represented. He's not that. But he's like with the sunglasses on. He's holding his hand. And he's stopping all the bullets. And they were like the right mastering cancel culture. But yeah, but Charlie Kirk did not become like he did not reach that George Floyd level of veneration.
Well,
Good
it wasn't
point.
even that. It wasn't the George Floyd level of veneration. It was the George Floyd level of activism. So George Floyd motivated an activist culture that was already looking like the left is already like looking for a reason. to be revolutionaries. George Floyd
Burn down Target.
was, yeah, George Floyd was a leader, a martyr to follow into revolutionary culture. The right does not have the same revolutionary ideals. And so if you if you're trying to turn Charlie Kirk into a martyr, what are you trying to get the right to do? Well, they elected Donald Trump, and then Charlie Kirk was killed and the right fell apart. So they didn't coalesce around Charlie Kirk. They actually fell apart behind the murder of Charlie Kirk. So you don't have the same type of structure in order to build and bring together behind a martyr the same way the left does, because you don't have the revolutionary idea.
Okay, so that's really interesting because then if I was like a minister of the counter-revolutionary status quo, my impulse would be like to order a hit on a guy like Alinsky. But then like my comrades would be like, no, but then like he's going to be a martyr. It's like, yeah, but dude, like just some cop, some random cop can have a guy, whatever happened to George Floyd. I'm not saying that uh the police officer's actions were like what should have been done or whatever, but just like some random person can get killed while interacting with the cops and they can become a martyr.
Right.
Like, but this guy's actually a threat.
Right.
Like, so take that guy out.
Yeah, I
Do you know what I
mean,
mean?
the
The
way I
people that would
look
exploit that.
the way I look at George Floyd is the cops, all of them that were there that day, were negligent to what was happening. They were not, they were so, and part of that was the crowd that had gathered around them that was causing an issue, right? And they were so concerned with what was going on around them, they forgot to pay attention to the person that they had in custody that actually truly needed medical attention, you know? And so there was a negligence there to that. I don't know if he would have died without the drugs in his system. And I don't think there's any way of knowing that without having have got him the medical attention required at that particular moment. And so that negligence, that making the wrong choice destroyed all those lives and took a life that all of which could have been saved in some way. And so that's disastrous. And that's the way I try to look at these things. Like George Floyd, for all the bad that he had done in this world, he wasn't beyond retribution. And those cops could have been um, a tool utilized in order to lead him to the salvation required for him, and instead were became a tool for the destruction of uh, a large portion of society. And so there is definitely like a negligence there. But I think it's all like it was just an embodiment, not necessarily the cops' actions, but what occurred after the BLM movement in itself was just an embodiment of what the American people were holding within themselves.
You make a really good point about the crowd because I know a lot of police officers. I've talked to them about their job, about their work, about their protocols.
Mm.
So the thing that really like struck me about the George Floyd footage was that just how long they kept him on the ground and they weren't talking to him. They weren't saying like, "Sir, we're going to get you up. Please don't resist," any of that.
Right.
But I didn't make that connection to like, yeah, they're surrounded by all these people, which you could think of as just like the crowd, or you could think of as like the mob.
Right.
Like there's definitely like an implicit threat that they have to watch out for. And it's in like in our society, we have this narrative. It's really popular in the uh on the left that like the whole society is irredeemable white supremacist project. And all the cops, if they're not actually white supremacists, because that one cop is like Asian, but he's like partaking in the whiteness and partaking in the power, which equals
Right.
whiteness. So
Because
the evil white supremacists
white
partaking.
supremacy isn't about race, it's about an ideology. Yeah.
Right. So this the ideology came down
That's why Jesse Lee
and
Peterson is a white supremacist.
who is that?
Jesse Lee Peterson, he's this black conservative commentator.
That's great.
He speaks with a lisp. He's funny. He had Jay Dyer on not that long
So
ago, and every time Jay Dyer would say something, he'd be like, "That's amazing." It was really funny. Jay Dyer was
I
trying to
gotta check this
explain to
guy
him
out.
what Gnosticism was, and he goes, "Nasty? Are you saying it's nasty?"
God. Nasticism.
It was hilarious. It was so funny.
Yeah, it's funny because like yeah, the left, like what's in the heart of the left is like all this anger, this revolutionary violence, burn down Target. But but it is interesting that they sort of they need something to point to kind of justify it. Not just like we're gonna do it. No, we need that martyr. We need that jumping off
Right.
point to sort of uh so that in their own eyes they can like look like good people.
Yeah. We excuse me. We have to push that revolution one way or
Salud.
the other, and we will use whatever we have at our fingertips to do so. I knew that one was coming. I always come in pairs. Anyway,
Salud.
all right. Thank you. At the same time, the revolutionary leaders should make certain that their publicized violations of the regulations are so selected that their jail terms are relatively brief, from 1 day to 2 months. The trouble with a long jail sentence is that a revolutionary is removed from action for such an extended period of time that he loses touch. And if you are gone long enough, everybody forgets about you. Life goes on, new issues arise, and new leaders appear. However, a periodic removal from circulation by being jailed is an essential element in the development of the revolutionary. The one problem that the revolutionary cannot cope with by himself is that he must now and then have an opportunity to reflect and synthesize his thoughts to gain that privacy in which he can try to make sense out of what he is doing, why he is doing it, where he is going, what has been wrong with what he has done, what he should have done, and above all to see the relationships of all the episodes and acts as they tie into a general pattern. The most convenient and accessible solution is jail. It is here that he begins to develop a philosophy. It is here that he begins to shape long term goals, intermediate goals, and a self analysis of tactics as tied to his own personality. It is here that he is emancipated from the slavery of action, wherein he was compelled to think from act to act. Now he can look at the totality of his actions and the reactions of the enemy from a fairly detached position. Every revolutionary leader of consequence has had to undergo these withdrawals from the arena of action. Without such opportunities, he goes from one tactic and one action to another, but most of them are almost terminal tactics in themselves. He never has a chance to think through an overall synthesis, and he burns himself out. He becomes, in fact, nothing more than a temporary irritant. The prophets of the Old Testament and the New found their opportunity for synthesis by voluntarily removing themselves to the wilderness. It was after they emerged that they began propagandizing their philosophies. Often a revolutionary finds that he cannot voluntarily detach himself since the pressure of events and actions do not permit him that luxury. Furthermore, a revolutionary or a man of action does not have the sedentary frame of mind that is part of the personality of a research scholar. He finds it very difficult to sit quietly and think and write. Even when provided with a voluntary situation of that kind, he will react by trying to escape the job of thinking and writing. He will do anything to avoid it. Noah did not remove himself to the wilderness. He just waited for God to flood the earth. So, well, there's one that you're wrong on. Um, Moses went up to the mountaintops. He didn't go to the wilderness, but whatever. I remember that once I accepted an invitation to participate in a 1 week discussion at the Aspen Institute. The argument was made that this would be a good opportunity to get away from it all and write. The Institute sessions would last only from 10 to noon, and I would be free for the rest of the afternoon and the evening. The morning began with the Institute sessions. The subjects were very interesting and carried over through a luncheon discussion, which lasted until 2:30 or 3. Now I could sit and write from 3 to dinner. But then one of the members of the discussion group, a most interesting astronomer, stopped in for a chat. By the time he left, it was 5 p.m. There wasn't much point in starting to write then, for there would be cocktails at 5:30, and after cocktails, there wasn't much point in sitting down to start writing because dinner would be served soon. And after dinner, there wasn't much point in trying to start writing because I had drank too many cocktails and I had a good buzz. It was late and I was tired from having a good buzz. Now, it is true that I could have got up immediately after lunch, told everybody that I was not to be disturbed, and gone to spend the afternoon writing. I could have gone back to my quarters, locked the door, and hopefully started writing. But the fact is that I did not want to come to grips with thinking and writing any more than anyone else involved in revolutionary movements does. I welcome the interruptions and use them as rationalizing excuses to escape the ordeal of thinking and writing. Anybody who writes thinks that way. It's not a revolutionary mindset, it's the writer, it's the way the writer processes the world. You know that once you lock yourself into the cell of your mind and start pouring your thoughts onto paper, it's damn near impossible to pull you out of that. And it terrifies you because that interruption is so palpable that it shakes you to your core. I'm just saying, writing is not fun. It is very much a labor of love. Ask Scott Horton.
Preach. Yo, I'm only half joking when I say this, but we need somebody to like promise to write a book with Scott. But then after Scott gets really into it, they'll just stop writing. So we can get another Scott Horton book. I want one about the war in Iran. So if anybody out there wants to write a book with Scott, step up.
Let's see if Daryl Cooper will write one with Scott. I bet that would be killer. There would be no end to that book. You thought Provoked was big. Daryl Cooper and a Scott Horton Iran book would be like the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Permanent jail book.
Yeah. It would just it's like the never ending story. Jail provides just the opposite circumstances. You have no phones and, except for an hour or so a day, no visitors. Your jailers are rough, unsociable, and generally so dull that you wouldn't want to talk to them anyway. You find yourself in a physical drabness and confinement, which you desperately try to escape. Since there is no physical escape, you are driven to erase your surroundings imaginatively. You escape into thinking and writing. It was through periodic imprisonment that the basis for my first publication and the first orderly philosophical arrangement of my ideas and goals occurred. Time and tactics. Enough of philosophical cells. Let's get back to the business of the active essentials of organizing. Among the essentials is timing. Timing is to tactics what it is to everything in life. The difference between success and failure. I don't mean the timing of the start of a tactic. That is important, certainly, but as has been stated repeatedly, life does not usually afford the tactician the luxury of time or place when the conflict is engaged. Life does permit, however, that the skilled tactician be conscious of the utilization of time and the use of tactics. Once the battle is joined and a tactic is employed, it is important that the conflict not be carried on over too long a time. If you will recall, this was the seventh rule noted at the beginning of this chapter. There are many reasons of human experience arguing for this point. I cannot repeat too often that a conflict that drags on too long becomes a drug. The same universality applies for a tactic or for any other specific action. Among the reasons is the simple fact that human beings can sustain an interest in a particular subject only over a limited period of time. The concentration, the emotional fervor, even the physical energy, a particular experience that is exciting, challenging, and inviting can last just so long. This is true of the gamut of human behavior, from sex to conflict. After a period of time, it becomes monotonous, repetitive, an emotional treadmill, and worse than anything else, a bore. From the moment the tactician engages in conflict, his enemy is time. This should be kept in mind when one is considering boycotts. First, any consideration of a boycott should carefully avoid essentials such as meat, milk, bread, or basic vegetables, since even selective buying weakens after a period of time as the opponent cuts his prices below his competitors. With non essentials, grapes, bananas, pistachio nuts, don't tell my wife pistachios are non essential, maraschino cherries, and the like, many liberals can make the sacrifice and feel noble. Even so, any skilled organizer knows that he can push this negative over into a positive. He can compel or maneuver the opposition to make the mistake themselves. The drama of continuous involvement builds up an immunity to any further excitement. The consequences is that the opposition will finally, out of their own tedium, give in. The pressure of time should be ever present in the mind of the tactician as he begins to engage in action. This applies to the physical action, such as a mass demonstration, as well as to its emotional counterpart. When the Woodlawn organization in Chicago decided to have a massive move in on City Hall with reference to an issue on education, 5,000 to 8,000 individuals were to fill the lobby of City Hall in Chicago at 10 a.m. for a confrontation with the mayor. At the time the strategy was being developed, the function of time in the use of the tactics was examined and understood, and therefore the tactic was utilized to its fullest potential rather than turning into a debacle, as was the case with the recent Poor People's March, Resurrection City, etc. There was a clear understanding on the part of the leadership that when some thousands of people are assembled downtown, the physical tedium of standing, of being in one place for a period of time, begins to dampen ardor rather soon, and that small groups will begin to disappear to go shopping, go sightseeing, get refreshments. In short, the life of the immediate metropolitan area becomes much more attractive and inviting than simply being in City Hall in an action that has already spent the excitement of witnessing the opposition shock. After a while, and by a while meaning 2 or 3 hours, the 8,000 would have dwindled to 800 or less, and the impact of the mass numbers would have been seriously diluted and weakened. Furthermore, the effect on the opposition would have been that the mayor, seeing a mass action of 8,000 shrink to 800, would assume that if he only sits it out for another 2 or 3 hours, the 800 will shrink to 80, and if he sits it out for a day, there will be nothing left. That would have gained us nothing. I would have never made it. I would have stopped for a beer and forgotten about the demonstration. With this in mind, the leadership of the Woodlawn organization made its confrontation with the mayor, told the mayor that they wanted action and quickly on their particular demands, and that they were going to give him just so much time to meet their demands. Having given their message, they said they were now calling off their demonstration, but they would be back in the same numbers or more. And with that, they turned around and led their still enthusiastic army in an organized, fully armed, powerful withdrawal and left this mass impression upon the City Hall authorities. There is a way to keep the action going and to prevent it from being a drag. but this means constantly cutting new issues as the action continues, so that by the time the enthusiasm and the emotions for one issue have started to de escalate, a new issue has come into the scene with a consequent revival. With a constant introduction of new issues, it will go on and on. This is the case with many prolonged fights. In the end, the negotiations don't even involve the issues around which the conflict originally began. It brings to mind the old anecdote of the Hundred-Year War in Europe. When the parties finally got together for peace negotiations, nobody could remember what the war was all about or how it had begun. And furthermore, whatever the original issues, they were now irrelevant to the peace negotiations. I disagree. I'm sure there was some old hoagie with a cane shaking it at all the politicians, going, I'm telling you, we were fighting over this. And he remembered every little bit. Probably an old lady. Women never forget nothing. They're like elephants. Not physically. I'm just saying. New tactics and old. Speaking of issues, let's look at the issue of pollution. Here again, we can use the haves against the haves, use the haves against the have-nots, I think, to get what. Oh no, that use the haves. I see what he's saying. Speaking of issues, let's look at the issue of pollution. Here again, we can use the haves against the haves to get what we want. When utilities or heavy industries talk about the people, they mean the banks and other power sectors of their own world. If their banks say start pressing them, then they listen and hurt. The target, therefore, should be the banks that serve the steel, auto, and other industries, and the goal significant lessening of pollution. Let us begin by making the banks live up to their own public statements. All banks want money and advertise for new savings and checking accounts. They even offer premium prizes to those who will open accounts. Opening a savings account in a bank is more than a routine matter. First, you sit down with one of the multiple vice presidents or employees and begin to fill out forms and respond to questions for at least 30 minutes. If 1,000 or more people all moved in, each with $5 or $10 to open up a savings account, the bank's floor functions would be paralyzed. Again, as in the case of the shop inn, the police would be immobilized. There is no illegal occupation. The bank is in a difficult position. It knows what is happening, but still, it does not want to antagonize would be depositors. The bank's public image would be destroyed if some thousand would be depositors were arrested or forcibly ejected from the premises. The element of ridicule is here again. A continuous chain of action and reaction is formed. Following this, the people can return in a few days and close their accounts, and then return again later to open new accounts. This is what I would call a middle class guerrilla attack. It could well cause an irrational reaction on the part of the banks, which could then be directed against their large customers. For example, the polluting utilities or whatever were the obvious stated targets of the middle class organizations. The target of a secondary attack such as this is always outraged. The bank, thus, is likely to react more emotionally since it, as a body, feels that it is innocent, being punished for another's sins. At the same time, this kind of action can also be combined with social refreshments and gathering together with friends downtown, as well as with the general enjoyment of seeing the discomfiture and confusion on the part of the establishment. The middle class guerrillas would enjoy themselves as they increase the pressure on their enemies. Once a specific tactic is used, it ceases to be outside the experience of the enemy. Before long, he devises countermeasures that void the previous effective tactic. Recently, the head of a corporation showed me the blueprint of a new plant and pointed to a large ground floor area. Boy, have we got an architect who is with it. He chuckled. See that big hall? That's our sit in room. When the sit inners come, they'll be shown in, and there will be coffee, TV, and good toilet facilities. They can sit here until hell freezes over. Now, you can relegate sit ins to the Smithsonian Museum. Once, though, and in rare circumstances, even now, sit downs were really revolutionary. A vivid illustration was the almost spontaneous sit down strikes of the United Automobile Workers Union in their 1937 organizing drive at General Motors. The seizure of private property caused an uproar in the nation. With rare exception, every labor leader ran for cover. This was too revolutionary for them. The sit down strikers began to worry about the illegality of their action and the why and wherefore. And it was then that the chief of all CIO organizers, Lewis, gave them their rationale. He thundered, "The right to a man's job transcends the right of private property. The CIO stands squarely behind these sit downs." The sit down strikers, excuse me, at GM cheered. Now they knew why they had done what they did and why they would
Salute.
stay to the end. What's that?
I said salute.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Well,
I got this ever since I quit smoking a couple of years ago. I get this weird cough that just pops up every once in a while. I just hope one day my lungs have completely healed and I no longer have that weird cough that just pops up out of nowhere. The sit down strikers at GM cheered. Now they knew why they had done what they did and why they would stay to the end. The lesson here is that a major job of the organizer is to instantly develop the rationale for actions which have taken place by accident or impulsive anger. Lacking the rationale, the action becomes inexplicable to its participants and rapidly disintegrates into defeat. Possessing a rationale gives action a meaning and a purpose. All right. We got through it. That was a long
well
18
done.
pages.
Yeah, it was.
That's because
I
we were
blame
talking
Alinsky.
so much. So, any any final thoughts on tactics?
Well, just that in this chapter, he mentions one of the ideas that I've always heard mentioned whenever this book is talked about, the idea of the action being in the reaction, that you're deploying your tactic against these diabolical halves, and what you need is for their reaction to fuel your movement, which I always thought was fascinating. So now it's interesting to see him give some examples and to kind of get into his psychology about that.
Yeah.
But he did say that,
Go ahead.
to your point about like addiction, he said like, oh, I forget what how he puts it, but like when you do these revolutionary actions, if they go on for too long, they become a drug.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
They
idea where
become,
it's like, yeah, you can become
well, and
addicted to this.
you become numb to it. It loses kind of its emphasis. You're kind of like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And you kind of need that reminder. So you have to go to jail, which I thought was funny. You just go
Where
to
you can have
jail. You'll be all
privacy,
right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the first time I ever got arrested. I was in there. I was like, I was young, dude. I was like 17 years old. And I was in there and there was this big black dude. He was probably in his 30s or something like that. And he comes in there and he's like talking all kinds of mad shit like to the cops as they like push him into the holding cell, and he gets in there and he just starts laughing. And then he starts talking to some other dude that's in there. And I don't remember how the conversation came up, but he was just like, "Yeah, man, every Friday night I go out, I get drunk, I get in a fight, and I get arrested. And I get to stay in jail for 2 days, and they release me on Monday morning, and I go back to work. And it saves me a lot of money, like in places to stay and shit." I was like, wait, what? Like this dude does this shit in purpose? And he was like, yeah, he just thought it was the funniest shit ever. He's like, I like to fight, and fuck it, I get a place to stay for the weekend for free. I get I get three hots in a cot. I'm cool. I'm like, all right, whatever, dude. That's how you want to live your life, whatever. But yeah, so it's crazy shit. People are nuts. But yeah, I don't have a lot more to say. I think I've said pretty much everything I have to say about Alinsky's tactics. I think I've done a pretty sufficient job of pointing out that all he's talking about is the material world around him. And he expects these material conditions changing to change the happiness of the have-nots, and that's not what's going to change their happiness. How many superstars, actors, musicians, comedians have come from nothing, built a successful career, um, and wealth and fortune, and found themselves addicted to drugs and unhappy with their lives. And it's because the root of their happiness doesn't come from the material conditions of the world around them. It comes from within, comes from their spiritual well-being. And so it's just misapplied tactics and misapplied human ingenuity that are just going to make people more miserable in the world.
You said that Alinsky, in his shout out to Lucifer in the beginning of the book, is showing you that he's actually aiming at is the destruction of humanity. Do you think he realized that, or that's what he intended? Or do
I
you think
don't
he
think
really
so.
wanted, he really thought he could change the material conditions and make people happy?
I think he's possessed by an ideology and he doesn't understand what he's doing, which is what happens to a lot of people. Like when I first started this podcast and I was talking about libertarianism from a strictly economic standpoint, I was probably talking about a lot of things that I thought sounded intelligent and came across well meaning for people, but could have possibly had destructive capabilities on people's lives because just chasing that economic or the material well-being um, does that. And so I can't say for sure that he definitely understands what he's doing um, in the grand scheme of things, but ultimately that's what he's doing. Like that's what the ideology that possesses him is going to um, put forth as fruits is going to be destroying people's lives.
Well said.
Nobody has been, but nobody has ever said my life is better off because I went to jail. I mean, maybe I went to jail and I learned a lesson and I corrected my life, but being in jail is not the ultimate goal, right? And he's telling
I
these
went to jail and
people,
I got some writing done.
yeah, he's like, go to jail so you can write. Like he's telling people, like,
Go to the
destroy
cafe
your
and drink some
lives.
coffee.
Right. Yeah. How about Starbucks, dude? Go sit at Starbucks and write. Like
They
people
got
do it every
Wi-Fi. The
day.
coffee's okay.
Hey,
Yeah.
they're find a freaking pond and sit next to it and write. Like you don't have to go to jail. There are plenty of places where you can escape reality and write. Like you don't have to go to jail. So like yeah, like I mean, he's giving people like really poor advice from an ideological standpoint that he thinks is will further his ideology. And when that's like your ultimate purpose is the movement and its progress and not the progress of the human condition, then yeah, obviously you may not realize what you're doing, but you are working in hand with an ideology that is going to end up destroying lives. So I think there are a lot of well-meaning people out there um, in the world that are doing the same things that Alinsky does. So I can't say that his motivations are evil, but I'm pretty sure the outcomes are evil.
Well said.
So, well, plug, man, plug. I'm back from Kansas City, so we got to record your podcast one of these days.
Yeah, I gotta get you on. I've got a lot I want to ask you about. I'm excited to do that. Um, you just dropped a really good episode earlier today. I started listening to. I'm excited to finish that. Get your thoughts on the fight, the the business of it, the meaning behind it, the politics of it. I don't have any anything new at the institute since I did the my last article on ice. Um, but I got some stuff percolating. Doing this series with you has really got me um, thinking about a lot of different ideas. I actually emailed um, fathers DeYoung and Damick at their the email they give at their website to see if I could
Oh,
talk to them
The
about.
Lord of Spirits website. Yeah.
Yep, to see if I could talk to them about especially their episode about the modernism and the postmodernism. Um, and yeah, the institute's got a lot of good stuff out there. Scott Horton Academy is really taking off. I know Scott's trying to get out a new course done by him based on his book Provoked, and that's going to be phenomenal. So people should definitely check that out.
Good deal. I killed
Yeah.
a copperhead the other night, but otherwise I'm good.
What's that?
I said I killed a copperhead the other night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It got on the porch. I don't know why it just popped in my head, but I was like, oh, that stupid snake got on my porch. Oh, oh,
It's a victory. You got to celebrate it.
man, my dog walked off the porch and pushed the screen door open, and that snake went right between its legs and came up on the porch like immediately. I was like, you son of a bitch.
Oh,
I was like,
dang.
all right. I was like, Butters, Boogie, get inside. I got to go get the snake charmer. So that was a thing. But
Well done, sir.
yeah, well, yeah,
Defending the home.
living that redneck life, man. I'm pretty good at it. I'm a surgeon with that 410, dude. I could remove your
That's
gallbladder.
that's good living.
Yeah. But all right, man. Well, I think I'm going to stop this recording. We've been going for a minute, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing us just bullshit. But we got a few more chapters to go, and then who knows? Maybe we'll come up with another series we want to do. We'll figure it out.
I think we will.
I know where to reach you.
You know where to find me.
Yeah. Oh, not that. Wait, wrong, wrong button. Where's this button at? Ah, there it is. Stop.